Welcome to the Sublime Soiree. I'm Sue, and Linda and I are so excited to get to talk with Lauren Fuller today. We had the opportunity of being at the Refuge Host Homes banquet, which was, I think, 3 weeks ago, and talked to Lauren there. And she shared with us some unique ways that she has offered hospitality. So today we want to talk to you a little bit about some of those ways. And recently you had shared about hosting dinners. Can you tell us a little bit about what prompted you to host these dinner gatherings and why?
Sure. The initial concept was not mine. It came in a magazine article that my mom had read about a family that had moved to a new town and wanted to get to know neighbors because they didn't know anybody. And their concept was that they would invite a couple of people and ask those people to invite others. So essentially they would end up with a group of people they didn't know and just have an evening of making connection. And I thought that was a great idea. And I think I might have done it once years ago. And then fast forward a lot of years, and I was actually in India at the time. It kind of like came in my mind, and I was reading about a lot of the racial tension that was happening in the US at the time. It was specifically around the Trayvon Martin case. Okay. And I was reading just people's responses on Facebook and just thought, we have a whole lot of issues here, but the issue, in at least my core belief, is that for the bulk of people do not actually hate other people. These issues arise because we don't know people in a given category. So however we in our minds lump people, our unease or our ability to talk negatively about or have feelings towards isn't based in hate. It's really more based in not knowing. So I thought, what if you could create a space that allowed people to just come, essentially just one meal. Some dinners ended up branching into other things, like if the group connected. But the idea was if you can just get to know one person inside whatever that a category is, that you can't look at that same category in the same way anymore. Your perception shifts. And I truly believe that, honestly, that happens with just getting to know one person sometimes. Because then you have to say okay, I might disagree with that, but man, that one person was kind, or man, that one person and I still saw eye to eye on whatever. So that was kind of the initial prompting was let's just get people to the table. So that's kind of how it started, with an idea, and then it took off. So
Okay. Yeah. So Lauren, you may have answered this a little bit already, but how did you determine who you were going to invite to each gathering?
Yeah. So it never really worked exactly the way I envisioned, but the idea was that I would invite 3 people and I would ask each of those 3 to invite 2 more. So ultimately you would end up with a table of 10. I would try to intentionally diversify. So, in some ways you're guessing, but I might invite someone who was Muslim and someone who was Christian, or someone who was from the United States. I have a lot of international friends. So I would invite an international student, or I would invite, just whatever divide I could come up with. I would try to get people who at least in some ways were obviously different in a way that was obviously seeable. I would try to diversify. Once dinners got going, it kind of became known. So I would just sometimes post hosting a dinner on this date, who's interested. And then I would just pick from the list, again, trying to pick people that, from what I could guess, were a bit more diverse. And I would ask the people I was inviting to consider the same, don't invite both people from work, try to expand the circle. So
yeah. Okay, neat. So Lauren, can you tell me or tell us about maybe a dinner where there was a particular story that stood out to you from that evening?
Yeah. The truth is there's been lots. I mean, in just I'll share one in particular, but there has been tons of cross sections. So there were times that there'd be a lot of times at a dinner would end up, people would cancel often because you're essentially asking them to come to dinner with someone they don't know. So it's a lot easier to be like, I can't tonight. So I'd end up with lots of spots, and I would have a few people who just were like faithful last minute filler-inners. So I would have incredible conversations. I have a friend from Saudi Arabia who's just very open about what it's like to be Muslim, what it's like to be in America as a Muslim, and just getting to have open conversations. I've had tons of those intersections of people where they wouldn't have otherwise crossed. I have two dinners that I always say were the most impactful. One that really stands out was kind of looking at, I think one of the things as a church we don't often know how to engage well is the rise of like the gay and lesbian community in the US and where that intersects with the church. And dinners, I mean, sometimes my faith would come out in a dinner, but that wasn't necessarily the focus. The focus was just to kind of have an open table. So at this particular dinner, from my perception, this wasn't what was told to me, but gauging the crowd, one of my really good friends was there who at the time was still dating her now wife, but she was there. Oh, I'm sorry, they were married at the time. There was a couple who I knew to be a very strong Christian couple who was a little older. And there was a lady who rear-ended me on the way home from school, and I invited her. So I didn't know it at all. Obviously, I had no idea what she was going to bring to the table, and she actually showed up, which I felt like was a miracle in its own because that was random. So she came, and there were several other people at the table. I don't necessarily remember all of those dynamics, but at one point, the lady who rear-ended me is discussing some politics in ways that were more controversial, that were harsher, I should say. I don't care what people discuss, but my request is that people present whatever they're doing with an open mind, assuming that everybody at this table might believe the opposite of you. So how do you lean in as a learner and not just a teller? But in this particular instance, this lady was quickly becoming much more of a teller, and was very anti-Trump and Republican things, and in a way that started to like just stir some uncomfortableness. And as the person who's running dinner, you always feel like you kind of have this sense of responsibility to it. My friend who I had mentioned is in a lesbian marriage, and we have had a long, beautiful history of just becoming friends despite what we believe and who we are. And in my mind, she and I have had so many beautiful discussions. She's one of my dearest friends, and I knew that she held the key to kind of like solving this awkward dinner. But I was like, I can't offer this because this is her story. So I'm kind of like hoping that she's gonna like take over in this moment. But I don't know, because I'm kind of like trying to like make eye contact with her, like, come on, you can do it. And so it's kind of awkward for a second. And I mean, I just love the way she did it because it was just beautiful. And she kind of like pushes back from the table a little bit for a second. And she's like, oh, backing up. She's just a genuinely beautiful human who really just takes an interest in people. So by this point, I knew everybody in the room. We were eating at this point, having dinner, but we always start with like appetizers. So she had already connected very well with everybody because she's just like that. And so at this point, nobody would have had any idea that she's in a lesbian marriage. And so it's a little controversial, like I said. She kind of pushes back from the table for a second and she says, my wife and I, and you can just kind of hear it, then she pauses because she kind of lets that like soak in. She goes, my wife and I have 2 girls. And she goes, based on what was just put into law, if I were to die tomorrow, my daughters would not go to my wife. And she said she might get custody eventually, but for right now, she has no legal ties to them because of what was just put into law. This is years ago.
Okay.
And there's kind of this pause, and it's giving something that's a ballot and discussion and rules or whatever topics. It's giving news topics a human.
Mm-hmm.
So no one wants a mother to not be able to raise her kids. Like, we just humanly don't. We feel that. And so the room feels that with her, of like, oh man, I feel that. And she goes on and she says, but a good friend of mine called right after the election. So this must have been right around the first time Trump had been elected. And she goes on and she said, a friend called right after and just said, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't think of how this would affect your family. I voted in what I thought was the best way because of all of these reasons, and it never dawned on me. And my friend talking to her friend said, I just want you to know that however you voted is fine, and I still respect and love you, and I still desire a friendship. Like, that has nothing to do with it. And just kind of like, as she's sharing her story, there was kind of this like lull, this like pause that just came over dinner, where all of a sudden the woman who was very anti kind of Trump and that upcoming in the office is kind of pauses, because she's realizes that someone who's in that actual position, who's actually tangibly affected, is choosing to love someone who was in conflict. And the couple, who I'm imagining to be pretty solid believers, and I don't know what their political affiliation was, but in my mind I'm like, I wonder how they're feeling. They kind of pause for a second, because a person who may or may not have been in conflict with what their belief system may have been has just offended them. So all of a sudden it's like the entire dynamic of the room shifts, because people were people, and we had a people moment instead of a politics moment, and it just softened the room. And I left that dinner thinking, like, this is why I do dinner, is because your perception of everybody in that room shifted. Everybody in that room learned something about how to interact and how to treat people despite what you believe. And I just felt like that's why I do that. So it was beautiful, to be honest.
An absolute win, for sure. Hi, friends. Thank you for watching. Tune back tomorrow, where we talk with Lauren about how she made the transition from dinner host to host of moms in vulnerable situations through Refuge Host Homes.